There's so many women that don't even know that you can only get pregnant like 5 to 6 days out of the month. They think it's like, oh, every time I have intercourse, I have a risk of getting pregnant. Nope. It's only about 5 to 6 days out of the month that you can get pregnant. And your egg that you drop is only viable for about 24 hours, and sperm can live in us up to 5 days. So that's where we get like the 5 to 6 day time frame of like having a baby or making a baby. So if you are in tune with your body, and I know this is your jam, is like how you can use your cycle to work for you and be more productive and all of that. It's like, well, then you can abstain from intercourse during those times that you're fertile, or use protection like a condom, or, abstain, even maybe the pull-out method. I mean, there's conflicting research on that about how effective it can be. And then you don't need any hormones. You don't need any birth control besides just being aware of what's going on with your body. That's what I advocate for, is like, well, let me teach you how you can understand your cycle more.
All right, Erin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I always love being able to talk about the hormones and the physiology of what is happening. I know it is so advantageous and helpful for many of my listeners to be able to understand more of what's happening inside their bodies. It's just really not something many of us were ever taught at all. And so I am so excited to have you here. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
For sure. So tell us a little bit more about you and how you got down, because I know it's funny, is like everybody gets their own zone of expertise and their thing that they find really passionate about. So how did you stumble across being so passionate about hormones and women's health and the cycle?
Yeah, so I am a naturopathic doctor. So I am licensed in the state of Arizona to practice medicine, which is fun as far as hormones go, because I can use, my credentials to do prescriptions for hormone replacement therapy, for thyroid medication, et cetera, to really optimize women's cycles. But I didn't really start off by wanting to help women with hormones, because it can be hard, because every woman is different and every body is different. So it takes, a lot of trial and error sometimes to find the right secret sauce for women. And then we throw in outside stressors and environmental toxins and life, really. And, things can go in a reverse direction, or we take a couple steps back before we take a couple steps further or forward. So it's really challenging. But I think now that's what I really like about helping women and their hormones, is the challenge. And to hear that they actually feel better, that they've gotten answers for the way that they feel, is really why I keep doing what I'm doing every single day, and why I named my practice Hope Natural Health, because so many women have been defeated. They've felt hopeless. They've gotten no answers or no direction, and they just don't know what to do, and just kind of chalk it up to, oh, I guess that's the way I'm going to have to feel for the rest of my life. And that's not the case. So that's why, I have such a passion for helping women, because women's health is really broken, and the care that we receive is awful. And it's just, I keep screaming from the rooftops, doing podcasts like this, educating, and just, letting women know that they don't have to suffer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you bring this up. And I don't know if I've brought this up on the podcast yet, but I recently have posted online and had a lot of really angry people like talking about, oh, like, isn't that good for you? Right? Like, isn't it wonderful that you don't have PMS symptoms and all the rest of us do? And, get off your high horse type of thing. And I think the whole concept of my post was around how these symptoms and these experiences that many women are having have been normalized, and that it's not necessarily something that's normal. And kind of, can we reframe and relook at the way we are treating women, and just seeing these symptoms and things as completely normal, versus this is something that maybe isn't necessarily normal, but we've been conditioned to kind of believe it is. So what are some of those things that you feel like have really been normalized in our society as like, this is just part of the normal woman experience, but maybe not necessarily need to be?
Basically awful menstrual periods, like anything that has to do with a period that is not fun for you has been normalized. So really your period should come and go and just be more of a nuisance than anything. But if there's more than that, like you're bleeding so heavily, you can't leave the house, you have to bring a change of clothes. You're wearing what I call a tampad, or what people have told me, they're wearing a tampon and a pad because they're afraid they're going to leak. You're calling out of work sick. You're in the fetal position. You literally feel like garbage for, 3 weeks out of the month. This is not normal. And it's been normalized. And so many women have come to me saying like, oh yeah, I went to my doctor and they said, well, that's just the way it is. Or here's an antidepressant, or maybe you should lose more weight or exercise more often, or, oh, you're just a busy mom, get some more rest. And they're like, but no, this is not what I signed up for. And it's not fair that I have a period like this, but my best friend, it's like, oh, not a big deal. She has a period and it just comes and goes. So I think that's the disconnect. And more women need to start standing up and saying, no, this is not normal. I want testing. I want answers. And if they're not getting it from whoever their provider is, there's other providers out there that will help them get the answers they deserve.
Well, and even on top of that, I would love your kind of take, because I know a lot of people, like, they will go advocate for testing. They do go ask for all those things. And then the question and the answer that they get back is the labs are all normal. Like, everything's normal. Like, I will even just say, like, for me, I had some abnormal bleeding this last year. And then same thing, like, I went to my doctor, was like advocated for it. She did a pelvic ultrasound. They did all these different things. Ran a bunch of tests. And at the end of the day, she was like, it's normal.
Yeah.
And I was like, this isn't normal. And so, like, I had to do my own research and advocate on my own and do these other things. But for a lot of women, they're getting those answers that this is just normal. Like, all your labs are normal. So there's nothing wrong. Where and how do they go beyond that? Like, when that's the answer that they're getting?
I highly, highly doubt your labs are normal. If you've had hormones drawn, you'll see that it's very rare. And I've drawn hundreds, maybe thousands of labs by now. And it's very rare for me to see hormones flag high or low unless there's something like insanely off. And most often that's like your androgens or your testosterone will be high or low. Like, that's probably the one lab that's actually flagged. The rest of them, estrogen and progesterone, which are women's, primary hormones, they won't flag abnormal. They won't flag low or high unless it's like, again, something off the charts. And then we've got a more of a problem than we actually think we have, right? So the reason why it's deemed normal is because we have to learn how to interpret it for where we are in our menstrual cycle. And that's the disconnect too. A lot of practitioners or OBs or gyns or PCPs, they don't know how to interpret where the lab is based on the menstrual cycle. So women will tell me like, oh, my labs are normal. And it's like, well, where were you in your menstrual cycle when they were drawn? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, exactly. So is it normal based on where you are in your cycle? Probably not. And that's what more practitioners need to really educate themselves on and learn about, is the lab level based on their cycle.
Yeah.
Also, if you've been told that you've had this lab, and I just had a conversation with someone on a Facebook comment about an ablation and saying like, oh, curious thoughts on ablation. Not for me, but it was like a public post. What are the risks? I have horrible periods. And I said, well, question, why do you want the ablation, or why is the ablation an option? And she said, well, I have really heavy bleeding. I said, all right, well, have you had any testing done? I had labs tested and I had imaging. And I said, all right, well, I would assume that you were told everything was normal. And I, explained why. I haven't heard back yet, but I bet this is the exact same conversation. It's like, I had everything tested and it was normal. There's a reason why you have a heavy period. It is not normal to have a heavy period. So it could be a million different things. We just need to figure out what it is. There's a reason why you have debilitating cramps. There's a reason why, you feel like garbage. It's not normal. So don't stop at normal when you don't feel normal.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think that that's the answer people are getting.
Yeah.
And so, like, and this was something I'm kind of curious too, is like, do you recommend getting testing throughout the cycle? Or do you just take into account where that cycle's at? Because, like, from my knowledge and like what I teach my clients is like estrogen, progesterone, it's a dance. It's like, if one's high, it's impacting the other, or vice versa. And like, you want them both to be in this dance. And so I am of the ilk, and like, that you can't really find out what's actually happening if you are only snapshotting one part of that cycle.
It depends. The most accurate time of the cycle would be in the luteal phase, like cycle day 19, 20, 21.
Okay.
Is commonly where I draw first. Now, we might draw some other times. There's cycle mapping tests that we can do. I very rarely run those unless we've got a crazy abnormal irregular cycle that I'm having trouble trying to balance, right? And that typically is in the perimenopausal years where they're going to start to be, irregular anyways. So most women at that point are like, oh, I didn't even know that that's the best time to test for fertility purposes. And I'm not a fertility doctor at all or a specialist. We would draw cycle day 3 to see, some levels there. So it depends, but I would say I usually test, cycle days 19, 20, 21, or if women know when they're ovulating and they track it and they're using OPKs or basal body temperature to know, and they know they ovulate, we'll draw 7 to 10 days post that. But that's typically where I'll start. And that's the only time I'll draw, because I would say I get really good information just from that one draw based on everything else. And it's not just hormones either. So and when we say hormones, it's a broad spectrum of your reproductive hormones, your thyroid, and your adrenal or your cortisol levels. So all of that plays a role in your menstrual health. And so that's why it's important to look at all of that. And sometimes that's the missing component, the missing piece to their puzzle. Their body's not looked at as a whole. And that's what we do, in naturopathic medicine. We look at the body as a whole.
For sure. Well, yeah, when I said like I had normal labs, they ran thyroid meds or labs, and that was it. Like that was the only labs that they ran when I went in. And I knew, like, being that I have family history of thyroid dysfunctions, like in all of the women, like somehow, knock on wood, like I'm the one that has not had thyroid issues when all of the other women in my family have. So I knew, like, to dig deeper and like get the additional labs and not just like, I don't even remember off the top of my head, but just like the top of basic one that they'll go, like I got a ton of thyroid stuff done. Right.
Yeah.
But most people aren't even doing that. So if somebody needs to advocate to their doctor and they need to go in and they're noticing these symptoms and things like that, like what should they be asking for? What would they want them to dive deeper and go deeper?
Advocate for the labs. There's another, part of the lab work where I've heard from women that the hormones, they're irrelevant. It doesn't matter. There's nothing that can be done if they're off. That's like hogwash. Like, no, run, like find another doctor. There's so much that can be done. So I would advocate for a full reproductive hormone panel, like your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, a full thyroid panel, not just TSH, but looking at all components of the thyroid, and then your cortisol levels. That would be bare minimum. We want to look at blood sugar and inflammation, and some vitamins like vitamin B and D would be helpful. But if you're just kind of like asking and hoping, then I would start with the female, hormone panel and thyroid and adrenal function.
Yeah. Okay. This is beautiful because I think so many women are in that space of like, there's something there. I want things to shift, but like we talked about, like so much has been normalized. So one of the other big questions that I get asked a lot is around birth control and birth control's actual impact on the cycle and how people are functioning. So I know that birth control, you are probably on the same ilk of like birth control is not the answer for fixing all of our symptoms and all of our reproductive stuff. But what are some of those takes, like for people that want to limit having a baby and know that birth control is not the great option? What would your discussion with them be?
Yeah, so birth control 100% does not fix your period, no matter what doctor will tell you. It is suppressing your hormones. So yes, it appears that it's fixing your period, but it's really not, because what happens when you go off of it, everything returns, and you might even have some additional symptoms post that, depending on how long you've been on birth control. So if you don't want to be on birth control, I highly recommend, and this is what you advocate for, is like being aware of your cycle. There's so many women that don't even know that you can only get pregnant like 5 to 6 days out of the month. They think it's like, oh, every time I have intercourse, I have a risk of getting pregnant. Nope. It's only about 5 to 6 days out of the month that you can get pregnant. And your egg that you drop is only viable for about 24 hours, and sperm can live in us up to 5 days. So that's where we get like the 5 to 6 day time frame of like having a baby or making a baby. So if you are in tune with your body, and I know this is your jam, is like how you can use your cycle to work for you and be more productive and all of that. It's like, well, then you can abstain from intercourse during those times that you're fertile, or use protection like a condom, or, abstain, even maybe the pull-out method. I mean, there's conflicting research on that about how effective it can be. And then you don't need any hormones. You don't need any birth control besides just being aware of what's going on with your body.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I
Mm-hmm.
advocate for, is like, well, let me teach you how you can understand your cycle more. Cause I know that we discussed this on my podcast, but it's, the elephant in the room when we were younger. It's like, well, you have this
Yeah.
period that's going to start, you're going to bleed from your vagina, and here's a pad or a tampon. That's what's going to happen once a month. There is nothing else about it. Maybe we had some in sex ed, maybe there was some talk about it, but we were young then as women, and it's like we
Mm-hmm.
didn't care about it. So we didn't know anything. You don't know what you
Yeah.
don't know, or you don't remember. And it's not fair for us to have to suffer or not really understand what goes on, because the whole menstrual cycle in totality, from start to end till you start again, is like, it's a beautiful process. And
Mm-hmm.
we need to, as women, use our hormones to work for us. So you can't do that if you're on birth control, because you don't have any hormone. You have fake
Yeah.
hormone that is going to give you more symptoms that you don't even want.
Yeah, no, totally. And I know birth control is readily and easily and quickly, I mean,
Yep.
as
It's like
young
candy.
as like 13, yeah, all the way up. And I know, so for me, I developed kind of like a skin condition when I was in college, or that time frame. And looking back and like doing my research on the skin condition, there's a lot of people that believe that it's kind of an autoimmune flare from
Mhm.
being on birth control
Mm,
and like
mhm,
a hormonal reaction. So now I look back and I'm like, darn it, I like was only on birth control for a few years, and it was just for this same idea of like regulating hormones, getting things in check. And then now I look back and I'm like, it was the worst decision I could have made, because now I've got this lifelong like autoimmune thing. But I think that that's what happened. Like, so many women are going to birth control just because it's being given out to young 13, 14-year-old girls that are just
mhm.
now getting their periods, like helping them regulate their
Yeah.
periods. Like, what are the long-term ramifications or consequences? Like, because I think that there is a lot of emphasis on using birth control, one, to regulate hormones, which we've already talked
Mhm,
about is not the case. It's not actually happening. But for a lot of women, that symptom wise, it may actually feel like it's doing good. Like, it may actually
mhm,
feel like it's doing what we want it to do. So they feel like there's a benefit to staying on it, like other than just not getting pregnant,
mhm.
but like they feel like it's
Yep.
minimizing symptoms or limiting them. And I also had just recently a client or somebody I was talking to, and she said that she's been on birth control for so long that now she thinks like, if I come off of it, I'm probably going to be in perimenopause or transitioning to
Mm,
menopause.
mhm.
So she's like, well, do I even need to come off of it? Like, why would I want to come off of it? Like,
Yeah.
what is the difference? Like, if I'm happy with the way things are and the way my body is, like, why would I even consider getting off of it? So
Yeah, well,
what
the
would your
general
thoughts on?
side effects of birth control are, mainly the pill here is what we'll speak to, not really the IUDs, but you have increased anxiety, you can have increased depression, you can have weight gain, you can have suppressed ovarian function, because that's the mechanism of the pill, is to cut off the communication between your brain and your ovaries. So when are your ovaries going to turn back on? That's the question. Every body is
Mm,
different. So, some turn on right away. Some it's like, oh, I've been in this like I'm off mode for so long. The older we get, they might not turn back on. So that's where we can enter in to, menopause maybe a little bit sooner. Weight gain is another big one.
mm,
Increased risk of blood clots. Like there's so many different things. Hence why if you've ever looked at a birth control insert, it's miles long. And they don't tell you these things when you take birth control or
yeah.
they prescribe it to you. They just say, all right, well, if you have, the big symptoms or whatever, like a blood clot or your leg hurts, obviously go to the emergency room. But the little ones that are very important for our health, like gut. So birth control
Mm-hmm.
can cause leaky gut or malabsorption. So now you're not absorbing your nutrients. It causes B vitamin deficiency, specifically B12, which we really need for our thyroid, for our hormones, for our energy, for our DNA. Like it's such an important vitamin. It's one of the top nutrients that's depleted. So there's so many different things that happen long
Mm-hmm.
term that are actually helpful for us if we're on the birth control. And for the person that you spoke to about how she's been on it for so long and what's the point, I mean, I think that there's more risk the older that we are to be on the pill. I think
Mm-hmm.
you're at a higher risk of obviously developing blood clots, inflammation, maybe cancer, with all the synthetic hormone that's in you. I mean, there's conflicting research again, like does birth control cause cancer? I wouldn't say directly, but the
Mm-hmm.
synthetic hormone that can be found in birth control. I mean, there's tons of different birth controls now. So to really speak to all of them is not fair as far as that. So that's where you have to do your own research and digging is like, well, we'll look up your ingredient and see what's the long-term risks of being on this. But
Yeah.
again, like you shouldn't have to suffer going into menopause either. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, your symptoms might come back if you're on birth control for crappy periods, but just know that you don't have to suffer. We can fix that so that you can transition into menopause better. And it's,
Mm-hmm.
actually considered your second puberty. So I have a woman right now that has an IUD and she's 51. And I said, well, we got to get this out of you. Like, you don't need this. There's
Yeah.
more risks of having it in long term. And she was on it for horrible periods, like horror. And I'm like, well, we can fix that. And I'm like, I don't even know if you're bleeding. Like, if you could bleed right now, you're 51 years old, you're technically, menopausal or could
Yeah.
be. So it's like, it's being used. I've had also heard stories about the progestin only pill being used as hormone replacement therapy. I'm like, are you frigging kidding me? Like, that's a disaster. It's not being used for birth control and prevent pregnancy anymore. It's being used to fix periods or hormones, and it's not fixing anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And then just kind of segueing off of that and kind of pulling it back to like how my clients are learning about their cycle and things is like so much of it is geared around how it's impacting the way we think, it's impacting the way we
Mhm.
create for our business and how
Mhm.
it's impacting. And so one of the questions I get asked a lot is like, how does that actually play out with the cycle? And so or with birth control. And from what I have read and my understanding of it is that for a lot of women, that birth control can oftentimes create more of like a brain fog and that it's not significant enough. Like I even think about it yesterday. I was like, yesterday I was so tired and I was like feeling so lethargic and I was like, I want to take a nap. And yesterday was my birthday. So there was
Oh,
like
happy birthday.
yeah, cinnamon roll and bacon for breakfast. And then I was like on my way and I was like, oh, Starbucks is going to give me a free drink for the day. And I got decaf, but I still got this like, drink that I'm not used to. And then didn't really eat much in the morning otherwise. And then got to about 1:00. And I was like, I am dragging so much. And I
Mhm.
looked back and I was like, it's because of all this sugar and like
Yeah,
what I
sugar
ate
high.
all morning. Right.
Yep, and sugar.
But I don't think that like on a normal basis, people don't realize that fog or realize that
Mhm.
fatigue. They don't realize what they're feeling. And if that's what they're feeling all of the time, I guess is where I was going with the conversation. Like for
Yeah.
me, I had a very distinct, like this day felt different. I ate different. And so I noticed
Mhm.
that the consequences of it. But
Mhm.
sometimes I don't think people are putting that together necessarily with what birth control is making them feel.
Mhm.
And I actually have a friend of mine who helps people get off birth control easily. I remember her talking about was that like a couple broke up because she smelled differently and she couldn't
Mhm.
be around him anymore because he irritated her after
Mhm.
the fact. Like, and she realized like all these things, they just weren't compatible, but she was so like dull and numb that like
Mhm.
things just kind of went by. Anyway, all that to say, how is birth control really impacting the way people are thinking and the way
Mhm.
they kind of show up in that more cognitive way, not just like that physiological down below type of way? I guess it's a good way to put it.
Yeah, well, I think it just goes to back to the mechanism of how it works. It's cutting off the communication between your brain and your ovaries to make any of your natural hormone. And for us women, that's what we need to function. We need
Mm-hmm.
estrogen and progesterone. So it's being, replaced by synthetic versions of that. Are you getting, obviously you can still be productive and you can function on birth control, but it's synthetic hormone. Everything about it
Yeah.
is fake. Like the period you have on birth control is fake, like everything, you're just not using your natural hormones that we were born
Mm-hmm.
with to do what we're supposed to do. And then you
Yeah.
add in all those side effects that I mentioned, like the depletion of the nutrients that we need for proper health, for proper cognitive function, the leaky gut, the malabsorption, those
Mm-hmm.
things. Then yeah, that's why you don't feel that well. And there's so many women that I know we're probably speaking to a lot, that you don't know what it's like to feel good because you felt
Mm-hmm.
like crap for so long. And you're a prime example of, you had an off day yesterday, but you know why. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, now I know. And it's like, wow. I mean, I've helped so many women, feel better. And they're like, I had no idea I could feel this good because it felt like
Yes.
crap for so long.
Yeah. And I think that's like for me, that was one of the biggest things. Like I went on a health journey, 7, 8 years ago, and my daughter was born, and realizing how much what I was eating and how I was sleeping and how I was taking care of my body, like really did make such a huge difference
Mm-hmm.
that before I don't know if I would have attributed it to it. And so even in like this last year, I've eliminated pretty much most alcohol
Yeah.
and caffeine. And
Yeah.
I noticed like this morning, I actually drank a cup of coffee because I'm like out of my mushroom stuff that I do usually. And I was like, dang it, I want something. And the tea is
Mhm.
just not the thing. So I had a coffee, but like I can feel my heart
Yeah.
racing. I feel jittery. And so it's like those sorts of things too. Like I didn't realize how much those things were impacting me before.
Mhm.
And they're so subtle. Like even with my Aura ring, like I can have an alcoholic drink and go to bed. And the next morning it's like you did
Yeah.
not sleep very well. You
Yep.
were not rested. Your heart rate didn't get as low as it needs to be. Like all these things
Yep.
that had I not been subtly paying attention to them, I probably wouldn't have noticed them. And
Mhm.
what I've realized like over time is it's this compound effect, right?
Yep.
It's not just the one time, it's the over and over and over again.
Mhm.
And this is a whole nother conversation about like toxins and things. But I, for years and years and years, was totally fine using a bunch of different products. And then in the last 3 or so years, developed major allergies, like significant allergies to a whole host of things. But now when I look at it, like fragrances is one of the number one things.
Mhm.
And looking at it as like my body handled fragrances for a really long time. And I
Mhm.
think it just got to this like toxic load that
Yep.
eventually it was like, I can't do this anymore. And I'm like
Mhm.
so grateful in some ways that my body developed such a strong allergy
Mhm.
because it made me go from like, oh, I have them here and there to me like completely eliminating them, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's what's happening too. Sometimes I think not just with like the toxins, but just looking at like our bodies can handle this load, these
Yep.
stressors for so long that at some point it just breaks. And so how do we get really good about learning and understanding those stressors
Mhm.
and those moments before it gets to the point where our body just like breaks and it can't do it anymore?
Yeah, so that's where it's obviously education. You learn about things
Mhm.
that might be impacting your day-to-day basis, whether that's alcohol, whether that's inflammatory foods like dairy, gluten, sugar, whether that's, exercise, maybe hydration, and then the chemicals that you're around every single day. So that's just, again, being aware. It's,
Yeah.
tracking your symptoms and like, oh, I have a headache today. I didn't have a headache yesterday. Why would I have a headache
Mhm.
today? And then maybe going back to yesterday and thinking about what you did or what you were exposed to, or maybe over the last
Yeah.
week, or even like when it comes to your menstrual health, like say you have what you consider to be a normal period, and then all of a sudden you have an awful one. And then that's usually something was triggering that. Like maybe you traveled, or maybe your sleep
Yeah.
was off. Maybe you changed your diet. Maybe you didn't work out as much. Maybe it was the holidays. Like January, February periods are notoriously off for a lot
Mhm.
of women, and that's because of the
Mhm.
holidays. So that's where it's just becoming aware of your own body. We're in this like just a robotic type of environment. You get up, you do your thing. We're not in tune with our bodies anymore. So that's
Yeah.
where being aware and just starting there, tracking your symptoms, you will be like blown away with what you discover on your own, just, with what you're exposed to on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so true. And like I found that like this is just like totally random, but every fourth month of my cycle
Mm.
is usually
Hmm.
longer. It's like every fourth one, I'll go for like I'm usually right around the 30-day mark, but like on that fourth month, it's like 38 every fourth month. And I'm like, but at first I'm just like, why is my cycle irregular this month? Like, what was it? And then I started noticing it's the trend of like every fourth month. So there may be deeper trends to that too, and like different
Yeah.
reasons, but it just became one of those things like I learned and understand like my body, like when that
Hmm.
fourth month comes, I'm like, now I'm a little bit prepared for it versus
Right.
it just surprising me every fourth month, you know? And so I
Exactly.
think really learning and listening to everybody's bodies
Hmm.
and understanding what's normal for everybody is one, I think kind of highlighting on what we've talked about so far today is like you become such a better advocate for your own health
Yep.
and like what you need and how to take care of your body. It creates such a more in tunement and alignment, but then that allows you to then feel so much better and to
Hmm.
create freedom from some of the symptoms that you're feeling and be able to create the solutions that you need or find the solutions that you need. And just like ultimately what my passion is, and I'm sure it's yours too, but we're just different avenues of how we get there, is like helping women really learn to thrive and like
Hmm.
learn to live in a way that they didn't really know that they could live,
Yeah.
because it's something we never were really taught. And it's not the conversation that most of us have, and the research is lacking, and like it's coming, but it's not there yet. Like
Yeah.
it's just, how do we help women understand that we are different than men, and that's
Mhm.
a valuable asset. It's not
Mhm.
one right better than the other. It's just that
Right.
we are different, and how do we really lean into that and support that so that we function at our best?
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't
Yeah.
agree more.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know you have some resources and guides and things like that that
Mhm.
people can go over and grab to kind of kickstart and get this going. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, so I have a cycle starter wellness pack that you can download. It's on the front page of our website, hopenaturalhealth.com. You can download that. It's like a sleep guide, environmental toxin guide, a nutritional guide to really jumpstart, your hormones. And then I'm always available on Instagram, or mainly Instagram, or even TikTok,
Yeah.
to DM with any questions, specifically related to your cycle. I can't provide medical advice through the interwebs, but I
Yeah.
can, guide you in the right direction, or help you find a practitioner in your area. I can help remotely. I just can't diagnose and treat across state lines because I'm only licensed in Arizona, but I've helped so many women get on the right path to what they
Mm-hmm.
need to know so that they can start advocating for themselves if they're just completely lost on what to do.
So good. So good. Thank you so much for coming on. This was such a wealth of information. Is there any last little bit or anything that you feel like we've missed or left out that you want to make sure you leave people with?
Gosh, no, just
So good.
basically your symptoms are messages. So make sure that you
Mm,
listen to them and don't settle for normal as an answer. You are in charge of your own body. You know your body best. So if there's something off, don't stop at normal or no. Keep fighting and
yeah.
advocating for yourself.
So good. So good.